When I was around 13 or 14 years old, I had the most terrifying experience of my life. Even now, at 18, I remember every detail clearly because it still haunts me. Back then, my family and I lived in a rented apartment, and it was a place where we were warned that strange things might happen. The apartment was ordinary at first glance, but the owner had given us a heads up right before we moved in. He told us that we might experience something unusual in the house. He hinted at the presence of a Jinn, and although we weren't completely sure what to expect, we decided to go ahead and live there anyway. Initially, we didn't pay much attention to his words. I mean, who really believes in such things until they experience them firsthand, right? We thought it was just a story or superstition meant to scare us a little. Nothing more. Life in the apartment seemed normal for about a year. It was almost exactly a year later when things started to get strange. I began to have the same dream over and over again, every single night. This wasn't just any ordinary dream. It was so vivid and real that I couldn't shake it off no matter how hard I tried. The dream always began the same way. I would be sitting on my bed in the dark when suddenly I'd see someone in white clothing running from the second room toward the bathroom. The second room was the one the owner had specifically mentioned, the room where he said the Jinn lived. This figure in my dream was tall, dressed completely in white, and moved in a way that was both swift and eerie. I couldn't see its face clearly, and that made it even more frightening. It felt like the creature was aware of me, and it gave off a presence that chilled me to the bone. Every time in the dream, I'd get up to see who it was. As soon as I'd open the bathroom door, I'd find it covered in blood, thick, red, and everywhere like a scene out of a horror movie. My heart would race as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when the nightmare would take its darkest turn. The white figure would suddenly be standing there, holding a knife, staring at me. It was as if it had been waiting for me to look, waiting for me to see the horror it had caused. And then, without warning, it would start chasing me. Just as it would close in on me, I would wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if it was going to burst out of my chest. This same nightmare played out night after night, for what felt like an eternity but was actually about 7 to 8 days. At first, I thought it was just a bad dream, but when the same terrifying scene repeated itself over 20 nights or more, I knew something was wrong. This was more than just a trick of my mind. It was like the Jinn was trying to tell me something, to reach me in my dreams. That's when I realized I wasn't just dreaming. I was experiencing something truly supernatural. The nightmare had a routine, a pattern that never changed. Every night I would find myself sitting on my bed in the dimly lit room. There was a feeling of unease in the air, like I was expecting something to happen. It was as if the darkness itself was waiting to come alive. As I sat there out of the corner of my eye, I would always catch a glimpse of something moving. My gaze would snap toward the second room, the one the owner had warned us about, the room where he said the Jinn lived. From that room, I'd see a tall figure dressed in pure white, running straight toward the bathroom. The sight of the figure was enough to freeze me in place, but every time, I forced myself to move, to get up and see what was happening. I'd creep closer to the bathroom, my heart pounding louder with each step, my mind racing with questions and fears I couldn't even begin to answer. When I finally reached the bathroom door and pushed it open, my worst fears were confirmed. The entire bathroom was covered in blood, thick streaks and splatters staining the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, yet it felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. But the worst part was still to come. Just as I was trying to comprehend the horror in front of me, I would see the white figure again, standing just beyond the door. It wasn't running anymore. It was waiting, holding a knife in its hand. Its faceless presence seemed to stare right into my soul. In that moment, all I could think about was escaping. But every time I tried to run, the creature would lunge at me, chasing me through the house. Its movements were swift and relentless, as if it wouldn't stop until it caught me. No matter how fast I ran, I could feel it gaining on me, getting closer and closer. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I would wake up. I'd jolt awake in my bed, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my entire body drenched in cold sweat. The fear would linger long after I woke, my heart still pounding as though I was still in the nightmare. Night after night, this same scenario would replay in my mind, each detail exactly the same as before. It was like I was trapped in an endless loop, forced to relive that terrifying moment over and over again. No matter what I did, I couldn't break free from the dream's grip. What made it even worse was that every time I woke up, it felt like the nightmare had followed me into the real world. The line between the dream and reality became blurred, and I started questioning if what I was experiencing in my sleep was somehow connected to the presence of the Jinn in that apartment. This went on for over 21 days, the same dream haunting me every single night. I was exhausted, terrified, and on the edge of losing my sanity. I knew that what I was facing wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was something real, something I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. For the next 7 to 8 days, the nightmare continued without any change, as if it was stuck on repeat. Each night, the same scenario played out. The figure in white, the blood-covered bathroom, the relentless chase. It was as if the dream had a grip on my mind, refusing to let me go. But then, something even more terrifying happened. It was no longer just a nightmare confined to my sleep. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. There, just behind the main room door, I saw it, the same white figure from my dreams, sitting perfectly still. My heart stopped, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The figure was exactly as I had seen it in my nightmares, tall, draped in white, faceless, and watching me with a presence that felt overwhelmingly real. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light, but it remained there, unmoving and undeniably present. This was the moment I realized that what I had been experiencing wasn't just a bad dream. The nightmare had somehow crossed over into reality. The boundaries between the waking world and my dream world had dissolved, and now the horror was standing right in front of me. I felt paralyzed by fear, unable to move or even look away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Every rational thought I had told me that this was impossible, that figures from dreams don't come to life, but there it was, defying all logic. The terror that gripped me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt before. This was no longer something I could brush off as a product of my imagination. It was real, and it was happening to me, right there in the same house where I'd been warned about the Jinn's presence. I knew then that I couldn't handle this on my own. Whatever was haunting me was far beyond my understanding, and I felt like I was being watched, stalked, and hunted by something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. This wasn't just fear. It was pure, unfiltered dread. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that everything the owner had said was true. We had been told to expect strange occurrences, and now those warnings were manifesting in ways I could never have imagined. The Jinn wasn't just a story, it was real, and it was targeting me. At that moment, I knew I had to tell someone. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. The fear was eating me alive. I decided it was time to talk to my mom, to let her know everything that had been happening, and to see if she could help me make sense of this nightmare that had become my reality. With every ounce of courage I had left, I prepared to tell my mother about the horrors that had followed me from my dreams into the real world. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of what would be a struggle to free myself from the grip of the unseen force that had taken over my life. Gathering all the courage I could find, I finally went to my mom and poured out everything that had been happening to me, the recurring nightmares, the terrifying figure in white, and how it had started appearing even when I was awake. I told her about the blood in the bathroom, the knife, and how it felt like I was being chased not just in my dreams, but in real life. My mother listened quietly, her face growing serious with every word I spoke. There was a look in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, a mix of concern and understanding, as if she had expected this to happen someday. When I finished talking, she let out a deep sigh and nodded, like she knew exactly what I was going through. She didn't seem surprised at all. Instead, she calmly told me that these kinds of experiences weren't unheard of, especially when dealing with supernatural entities like jinns. She believed that the jinn's presence in the apartment was real, and that it might have been trying to communicate with me or frighten me on purpose. Without wasting any time, my mom decided that we needed to seek protection, something strong enough to counter the negative energy surrounding me. She knew of a Muslim Baba, a spiritual healer known for dealing with such situations, who could help us. We went to see him, hoping he would have a solution to the nightmare that had taken over my life. The Baba listened intently as my mom explained everything. He seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation and immediately began preparing a special locket for me. He said that this locket was made using specific verses from the Quran, designed to protect me from any evil spirits or jinns that might be causing me harm. When he handed the locket to me, he told me to wear it at all times, never taking it off, even when I slept. He assured me that it would create a protective barrier around me, one that no Jinn or supernatural entity could penetrate. At that point, I didn't care how it worked. I just needed it to stop the horror that was consuming my nights and invading my days. From the moment I put the locket around my neck, everything started to change. The nightmares that had plagued me every night for weeks suddenly stopped. I no longer woke up in a cold sweat, no longer felt that terrifying presence lurking in the shadows of my room. The figure in white that had haunted my dreams and stood behind the door vanished without a trace. It was like the locket had sealed away whatever dark force had been tormenting me. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could finally sleep in peace, without the fear of being chased by something I couldn't escape. My mother kept a close eye on me in the days that followed, watching for any signs that the Jinn might return, but the house seemed calmer, almost like a heavy darkness had lifted. We both knew that the locket was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a shield that protected me from whatever evil had tried to take over my life. That was when I truly believed in the power of the locket and the strength of my mother's faith. Whatever that Jinn was, whatever it wanted, it could no longer reach me. The terror that had once controlled my every waking and sleeping moment had finally been put to rest. Just when I thought things had finally returned to normal, I found out that I wasn't the only one who had experienced something strange in that apartment. My cousin, who occasionally stayed with us, began to share her own encounters with the supernatural. Her stories sent a chill down my spine because they were eerily similar to what I had gone through, but somehow they seemed even more intense. She told us that whenever she was alone in the house, she would hear faint whispers coming from the second room, the room where the owner had said the Jinn resided. At first, she thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but the whispers grew louder and more insistent, as if calling her name. It was like the apartment itself was alive, filled with an unseen presence that was trying to reach out to her. One night, my cousin woke up in the middle of the night to find the same figure I had seen, the tall, white-clad creature standing at the foot of her bed. But unlike in my dream, the figure didn't just stare. It moved closer to her, slowly, as if it was studying her. She described its presence as suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room and she couldn't move or scream, trapped in a state of pure terror. She said that the worst part was the feeling of being watched constantly, even during the day. She would catch glimpses of shadows moving across the walls when there was no one else in the room. Doors would creak open on their own, and lights would flicker, as if the Jinn was trying to make its presence known, refusing to be ignored. My cousin's encounters left her shaken to the core, and she admitted that she had never felt fear like that in her life. It was a fear that went beyond the physical. It was like her soul itself was under attack. She swore that whatever was in that apartment was not just trying to scare her, it was trying to break her spirit, to make her feel utterly powerless. Hearing her stories made me realize that my experience wasn't an isolated incident. Whatever dark force had haunted me wasn't just after me, it was targeting anyone who came too close, anyone who dared to enter that second room. It was clear that the Jinn was more malevolent than we had ever imagined. My cousin eventually stopped visiting our apartment altogether. She couldn't bear to spend another night under that roof, fearing that the figure in white might return, this time with even worse intentions. Her fear was enough to convince me that what we faced in that apartment was very real and very dangerous. In a way, knowing that my cousin experienced something similar was a strange kind of comfort. It proved that I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't alone in facing this supernatural force. But at the same time, it made everything even more frightening because it meant the Jinn's reach was far greater than I had thought. Even now, when we talk about those days, my cousin and I share a knowing look, a silent agreement that what we faced in that apartment was something out of a nightmare. Something that still sends chills down our spines. We both know that the darkness we encountered there was real. Far too real for either of us to ever forget. To this day, we both believe that the Jinn still lingers in that second room, waiting, watching, and ready to haunt anyone who dares to disturb its space. And no matter how much time passes, the memory of that figure in white and the terror it brought with it will always stay with us. Looking back on everything that happened in that apartment, I can say without a doubt that it was the most terrifying experience of my life. I've watched countless horror movies and read scary stories, but nothing I've seen or heard compares to the fear I felt during those nights. The kind of horror that invades your dreams, follows you into the waking world, and refuses to let you go, is something no fictional story can truly capture. People often talk about movies like The Conjuring or Insidious as the scariest experiences they've had, but I can honestly say that my story was on a different level. The difference is that this wasn't a script or a director's imagination. It was real, raw, and happening to me and my family. The fear didn't end when the credits rolled. It stayed with us, in our home, in our minds, and in our lives. I know that to some, this story might sound too wild or too strange to be true. It might seem like something out of a supernatural thriller, something exaggerated for effect. But I swear on everything that I hold dear, this was my reality. Every moment of terror, every chilling encounter, every sleepless night was real, and I lived through it. What happened in that apartment wasn't just a nightmare or a series of strange coincidences. It was an experience that changed the way I see the world. It made me realize that there are things out there beyond what we can see or understand, things that exist in the shadows of our reality. Even now, as I recount this story, I feel the echoes of that fear in my chest. The memory of that white figure and the blood-stained bathroom is still so vivid, like a scar that never fully heals. I've learned to live with it, to move on. But the truth is, experiences like these never truly leave you. This wasn't just my story. It was also my cousins and my family's. It was something we faced together, something that bonded us through fear and faith. We know what we saw, what we felt, and what we experienced, and we'll carry that knowledge with us for the rest of our lives. So, the next time you hear someone say that they don't believe in the supernatural, or that these things don't exist, remember this story. Because sometimes, the truth is far scarier than any fiction. And there are forces out there that defy all logic, forces that are as real as the fear they bring. We moved on from that apartment, leaving behind the Jinn and its haunting presence. But we will never forget the lesson it taught us. It reminded us that there are things in this world we can't explain, things that exist whether we believe in them or not. I'm sharing this story not to scare anyone, but to tell the truth about what we went through. It's not something I take lightly, and it's not something I ever want to go through again, but it's a part of my past that I've learned to accept, no matter how unbelievable it might sound to others. This story, my story, is 100% true. It's not some exaggerated tale or an attempt to create a fictional horror story. It's a memory that I'll carry with me, a memory that reminds me of the power of the unseen and the strength of believing in something beyond what our eyes can see.